But first, just when you thought we'd seen the last of pandemic paranoia and COVID alarmism terrifying us all witless, along comes Joe Biden with this creepy, crazy prediction.
Is there, and how many of the nation's kids will you be able to get vaccinated before you need more money from Congress?
Well, we'll get through at least this year. We do need more money, but we don't just need more money for vaccines for children eventually. We need more money to plan for the second pandemic. There's going to be another pandemic.
A second pandemic is coming, says Sleepy Joe. Now, it goes without saying that, of course, mankind is vulnerable to pandemics. We always have been and we always will be. Now, if Joe said another pandemic at some point down the track, well, fine. But to specifically talk about a second pandemic, to what is he referring? Another second virus leaking out of the Wuhan lab or jumping out of a bowl of bat soup? A monkeypox pandemic? It is hardly surprising that conspiracy theorists leap up and down with all sorts of crazy ideas about COVID and the way the pandemic is being used to manipulate global behaviour when you have the World Health Organization, Prince Charles and the United Nations all aggressively insisting the virus be used to, quote, reimagine and reset our world. And then you have the US president blurting out that he needs more money because there will be a second pandemic. What, in his term of office? But forget the conspiracy theorists. I played you some of Kamala Harris's completely incoherent and meaningless verbal drivel yesterday, and I tell you it is impossible not to conclude that the Biden administration is run by complete half-wits mouthing PowerPoint platitudes with no serious grasp on reality, relying on nothing but slogans and spin and weasel words instead of sound, logical debate and decision-making based on proven facts and experience. I mean, take the tanking economy, the soaring inflation, the energy crisis, the trillions of dollars on Build Back Better climate change money printing madness. What precisely is the economic theory that the White House is working to? Well, here's Karine Jean-Pierre, Biden's press secretary, when that very question was put to her.
Is there a working theory that the administration currently has as to why the oil companies have not already increased their refining capacity?
You know, there's no working theory.
There's no working theory. There's no working theory. OK, thank you, White House. That was Karine Jean-Pierre, as usual. Was she perhaps just simply telling us the truth? Joe Biden, why would he need an economic working theory? What economic data, then? Let's ask her this. What economic data is Joe Biden working to?
Is there a working theory that the administration currently has as to why the oil companies have not already increased their refining capacity?
You know, there's no working theory.
Sorry, that was the wrong piece. There is another piece where she actually says, no, there's no economic data either, that he has a team that tells him what information that he needs, and that information is all the information he needs. It's all just gobbledygook, pure and simple, trite, meaningless cliches, regurgitated and recycled in an endless loop where nothing has any substance or foundation. This is what George Orwell described when he said, political language is designed to give an appearance of solidarity to pure wind. Well, this verbal sludge is precisely what Paul Keating's speechwriter Don Watson railed against nearly 20 years ago. In his dictionary of weasel words, and when he wrote about the death of language being caused by the pompous lunacy of management jargon which reaches from the world's biggest corporations and government agencies to primary schools where children now use PowerPoint in English presentations. Don Watson warned of the increasing prevalence of management cliches from the likes of HR departments, essentially meaningless words like core, key, initiative, engage, ensure, underpin, processes, and the dreaded Klaus Schwab favourite, stakeholders. Indeed, we are now experiencing firsthand just how pernicious and dangerous these weasel words like stakeholders really are, used by the World Economic Forum and the woke left to undermine the very heart of capitalism. Instead of shareholders who invest in an enterprise and are enriched or impoverished according to the financial success of that enterprise and who are accountable, Stakeholders are this amorphous, unaccountable, often unidentifiable kind of blob that leeches off the success of an enterprise in the fraudulent name of equity and diversity. Stakeholders is simply PowerPoint prezzo code for socialism. We saw an example of the very real danger of political platitudes this morning in the Wall Street Journal, which reveals that Joe Biden has now endorsed racial equity as a third central bank priority for the world's most important economy. What does racial equity mean? Who knows? One thing is for sure is that Biden himself wouldn't have the faintest, because he doesn't have the faintest about anything. But in essence, it requires the Federal Reserve adding a third plank, a racial component, to the Fed's historic twin objectives of balancing full employment with stable prices. As the Wall Street Journal says, using a delightful turn of phrase that I'm sure even Don Watson would chuckle at, adding a racial equity mandate could cause their models to go catawampus. For example, how small would the black-white unemployment gap have to be? Requiring the Fed to incorporate race into bank and potentially non-bank supervision would contradict its duty to protect financial stability. And the Wall Street Journal goes on. Most banks are trying to increase lending to minority communities, yet this bill would require financial regulators to rate banks on diversity and inclusion. Minority-owned banks would automatically get the highest rating. The bill also instructs federal agencies to move deposits to minority-owned banks. What could possibly go wrong? And such racial favoritism almost certainly, says the Wall Street Journal, violates the Constitution. So potentially does the bill's requirement that public companies disclose to the Securities and Exchange Commission the racial, gender, identity, and sexual orientation of directors and executives. When will this left-wing insanity end, and how much damage will it do to us all and the world economy in its wake? Or should that be in its woke? Speaking of which, Sky News' Adam Crichton has a terrific piece in the Oz today about the relentless failure of the so-called expert class, the same PowerPoint prezzo gurus I was talking about, in which he observes experts have been so wrong about just about everything, he says. It's a great read. Check it out. And in the Financial Review, Robert Harley has a scathing piece in which he predicts, as I've been saying for months, by the way, that Matt Keane's and Dominic Perrottate's land tax grab will simply push up house prices at the lower end of the market. Quote, "The risk with this New South Wales policy is that it will put upward pressure on prices. First home buyers will have 50 grand in stamp duty savings that may simply find its way into a higher purchasing bid." Nice work, guys. Also in the Fin, John Kehoe is gobsmacked that, quote, "The usually principled and conservative Premier Dominic Perrottate has allowed Matt Keane's reckless budget spendathon to have occurred." Quote, "Treasurer Matt Keane's first budget defies traditional Liberal rhetoric on responsible budget management," Kehoe concludes. And I guess this last story, which a mate of mine alerted me to this morning, sums up all the woke madness and the denigration of language superbly. In April 2014, you'll remember, 276 Nigerian schoolgirls, many of them Christians, were brutally kidnapped by the radical Islamist outfit Boko Haram, which means Western education is forbidden. What was the West's response, led by First Lady Michelle Obama? A Twitter hashtag, yes, #bring back our girls. Everyone got very excited. 8 years on, many of those girls are still missing, but this week, 2 girls, now mothers, were found. Twitter, of course, has long since moved on to solving more other pressing matters with hashtags.